Let's talk about haircuts in prison. Because when most people think of prison hustles, they think about selling drugs or selling cell phones or running a store box where you loan things out at exorbitant interest, and don't realize that the barber is often one of the most liked, most respected, and best paid people in there. I think a big part of that is the fact that there was so little we could control. Almost everything was externally controlled, but we could try to control, at least to some degree, the way that we looked. When we found a barber who could cut our hair just the way we like it, a lot of guys would pay a premium for that. Every jail and every prison had to have some way for you to cut your hair. It was just a regulation. But in the jail, I remember you would get these little orange razors that you had to turn back in after an hour, and they weren't enough to shave one side of your face, and you'd only get them 2 or 3 times a week. And they had these trimmers that you could rent, but they had no way to clean them. There was nobody to cut your hair. You just kind of had to figure it out on your own. So you had a lot of really unkempt people in the jail. Now, once I got to prison, it was much more organized. Every pod or every housing unit had a barber who was assigned there. But unfortunately, this barber was not picked because he was the best barber. Often he was the one who had told something to lieutenant, or he was buddies with so-and-so. It was a job that was got not because of his qualifications, but because of who he knew. So that meant that a lot of people in that pod or that housing unit didn't want to go to him to get their haircut. He wasn't clean, he wasn't sterilizing all this stuff, but they just generally didn't trust him or had some kind of beef with him outside of that. So a lot of times you would have these private barbers, these guys who basically did it as a hustle or did it on the side, and they would be in high demand. Because for whatever reason, it seemed like they never got the actual barber position. Maybe it's just because then they would have had to do it for free or they wouldn't have been able to charge as much. I don't know. But they were the ones who guys would get to cut their hair. So instead of going to the barber who had the little kit with the plug-in stuff, we would have these beard trimmers. And guys would just absolutely do amazing things with these beard trimmers. But that's not the only thing. They would also take razors out of the disposable razors, because back at the jail, you had to turn your razor back in when you were done. Once you get to prison, they just hand it to you. You have it, wherever you want. I remember the first prison cell I walked into, there was a stack of razors on the sink like this. And after the jail, it was like, oh my God, I got to get rid of these. Like, they're going to shake us down. They're going to get us in trouble. Like, no, they don't care about those razors. They're just everywhere. And they would put them in between the teeth of a comb, and they would use that for edge ups and for lineups and like for really detailed work. One guy would actually literally just use a razor and he would melt it into something. It looked like a weapon, and you use that to get really fine work. So it was interesting to see the way the guys would do it. They're not allowed to. The only person allowed to cut somebody's hair is the pod barber. Now, on some shifts, that didn't matter. You could do it right in front of the booth. They didn't care. Some guys would do it out on the yard. They would go out there. That way, at least everybody in your side of the yard would be in there together, and you could get your hair cut by the best guy. On other shifts, they absolutely would send somebody in. They'd lock you up. They'd write a charge. So in many cases, it became you had to either go to that barber or you had to pay him enough that he was willing to come to you. Because if I'm in my housing unit, I can't get me in trouble for just being there. But if I go to somebody else's housing unit, it's a 229. It's an unauthorized area. So you had to be willing to take that risk to go somewhere else to get a barber to cut your hair, or pay him enough that he was willing to take that risk. And he could get locked up for this. He could go back to the hole. So usually guys came to arrangements, or sometimes he would literally even pay. Like if you had a guy who was running a parlay or had a whole bunch of money, he would pay to get the barber moved into his pod because he wanted his guy to cut his hair, and it was worth paying. Even amongst the haircuts or the way they were done, that changed a lot over the years. Because when I first went in, the hair regulations were extremely strict. Your hair could only be a 1/4 inch long, couldn't have any kind of style. Like you could have a fade, but you couldn't have kind of styles or designs or lines. You had to be clean shaven on your face, but you could have a mustache. And I've heard a bunch of reasons or explanations for this, but the reality is that it was about control. They decided if we can basically control the way people look, we can break them down, and then we can kind of control more of the environment. We can take away that will or that individuality. And you look at this, the same thing happens in the military, it happens in other things, and there are plenty of justifications about why it's more sanitary, but the fact that there are exceptions proves that it's not about sanitation. It's not about being healthy, it's about control. This was a problem for a particular group of people because back in the 90s, you could have your hair however you wanted. And there were some people when the new policy came in that weren't willing to cut their hair. There were Native American groups, there was a group of Rastafarians, and the group that really stuck with it the longest was the Rastafarians. Because in the late 90s, when they came in and put this hair policy in place, they refused to cut their hair. They were sent back to the hole, and they thought, okay, we'll be back here for a month or for a couple months, but we're gonna ride this out. When I got in 2004, they were still back there. When I got to Buckingham in 2008, they were still back there. When I left Buckingham, they had just been let out. They were back there for almost 2 decades. First 10 years, they were literally just in the hole. There was no special accommodation whatsoever. The Rastafarians lived every day in the hole, in isolation, no access to commissary, no access to services, because they refused to cut their hair. And DOC was like, cool, I know you say it's a religion, but like we don't really agree with you, so we're just gonna leave you back there. After 10 years, they started making some accommodations because basically the courts were like, you have to do something. They said, okay, well, we're going to put you in a special segregation unit. We're going to give you like more time with your peers. The reality was they were still just kept in the hole. They gave it a different name. They put some different labels on it. They may have been able to like leave and be in the pod, like chained to a chair for, I don't know, an hour every other day. But the reality was they kept them in the hole for nearly 2 decades because for religious reasons, they refused to cut their hair. And it still just blows my mind to this day that that's how they did it. And DOC fought that all the way. Because I remember the first lawsuit was won not actually by the Rastafarians, but by a Muslim group that said, hey, our religion requires that we have a beard. You can't say that we have to be clean shaven, especially because like, if I can have a mustache, it's not about being clean shaven. And even that wasn't very fairly enforced because for the 4 years that I was at Nottoway, I had to be clean shaven or I would not go to chow. There were these two guys that we had very not nice names for that used to stand at the gate. And if you had any bit of stubble on your face, they would turn you around and say, hey, you can't go eat or go back and shave and then you can come eat. And guys would literally be able to be denied being able to eat because they hadn't shaved. I got to Buckingham, it was a lot more loose. I could have a little bit of stubble, like a 5 o'clock shadow, and I would, just like everybody else, I would push it a little bit. I'd see how much I could get away with. And then I'd be in the hallway or I'd be going to chow and they'd be like, yo, you need to shave. And maybe the second or third time I would do it because I didn't want to get in trouble, but we kind of went for that. Anyways, the Muslim group won the right to grow a beard. And the court said, yeah, you have to do this. This is a religious right for them. And you haven't demonstrated any reason they can't. So they said, okay, well, you can have a 1/4 inch long beard, just like you can have a 1/4 inch long hair. And that's it. And this was cool for us because we had never been allowed to do that. So I grew out my 1/4 inch long beard and I didn't have any hair back then. I was shaved most of the time. It wasn't until the next policy that I actually grew my hair out. People started bringing suits, both for the Muslim population, as well as for the Rastas who were still back in the hole at this point, like literally still in segregation 2 decades later. Finally, the court said, hey, you're saying they have to have limits on their hair. They can't have this, they can't have that. But you haven't actually demonstrated a viable reason for that. And the prison system said, oh, well, they could hide stuff in their hair. And they're like, well, they can hide stuff in your clothes, but you don't make them go around naked. Like, you have not demonstrated why this is a unique threat. And you actually have things in place to address that. Like, if someone is caught with something hidden in their hair, they have to go to segregation or cut their hair after that. Like, you're punishing a specific threat, not just saying across the board, we're going to make people cut their hair, even when there are religious things in play. So all of a sudden, we could have as long a hair and as long a beard as we want, and the Rastas were let out from the hole. And I remember there were 2 guys at Buckingham who'd been back there, like I said, for 20 years, were suddenly let out on the yard. And just as hard as it was for me to get out of prison after 20 years, for somebody to get out of the hole after 20 years and just come into the prison, it was incredible to watch. I mean, they would go walk around the rec yard and still just like for months and months seem like it was an alien place and not know how to cope with it. And they actually ended up going in the cell together because they figured they were the only 2 people who could manage dealing with each other. And they almost killed each other just because they'd had their own space for so long. They didn't know how to share and they were very particular about things. And man, the kind of institutionalization, the OCD that grows up or that shows up in there is really disturbing. And it was on full display with them. And it really broke my heart because they had that experience for so long, again, just because they were trying to control them. And just because they said, hey, we'll recognize the religious rights of this group to drink wine or to do this, but we won't recognize your religious rights, which just absolutely blows my mind. Once they did that policy, I remember it was really funny because it was supposed to be, okay, on this day, you can only have a 1/4 inch long hair and a 1/4 inch long beard. And on this day, the next day, you can do whatever you want. And so for most of us, it was going to be a long process of growing our hair out or growing our beard out. And that was why I ended up having the crazy kind of professor hair when I first got out. Because when they did that, I was like, cool, I grew my beard and I grew my hair and then my beard got itchy, so I just kept the hair. But there was a guy named Zepp who had known this policy was coming because he was over in the law library all the time. Or maybe he had just been hoping it was coming. But either way, the day they put it in play, he took his hat off and he had been like taking his hair, pulling it back and like folding it under, and his hair was down past his shoulders. I don't know how he got away with this for the longest time. You see him going down the boulevard with his hair just like flowing behind him like Fabio or like a dark-haired Fabio. We were all kind of blown away because like, bro, Zepp did his thing. Zepp got away with that for a long time. Difference coming in between when you couldn't have any kind of like custom design or you had to be really strict about your hair to like, hey, you can have long hair and a beard. The barbers were still an integral part of that. And in the later part, it was interesting because they had to learn how to cut long hair because most of the guys had only ever done edge ups or only ever done fades, never had to deal with long hair. And all of a sudden you had guys that wanted mullets or wanted shaped things or wanted layered or wanted all these different ideas. But through it all, the barbers were really the cohesive people. They were the ones who kind of brought people together. And in many cases, they were the kind of group that people talk to. When you're sitting down having a haircut, it's almost like a therapy session. Like, as long as you like the guy, and I think that's some of the barbers that people paid, it wasn't even necessarily that they were that much better than anybody else cutting hair, but people wanted to talk to them. They wanted their advice, and they wanted to BS with them. And barbers played that kind of central role. So when you had a good guy in the pod, you always know that's who I want to go to get my hair cut, or who I want to go to deal with whatever. And I, fortunately, because I was cheap and didn't want to pay for anything, didn't usually. I did on occasion, but very rarely did I go to the barber because for me, it was just easier to shave my head. I buy a pair of beard trimmers from commissary, from property. They'd cost me $20. They'd last 5 or 6 years, and I would just shave my head, or I could put the little guard on there and shave it down. But I do remember trying to get fancy for a couple of visits, and this was early on, back when the whole policy was in place, and I had this girl come to see me, and I really wanted to impress her. And let me tell you, it was the worst idea ever because he absolutely butchered my hair. He basically gave me like a box cut, but with like just kind of a lump around. So it was like shaved all around and then kind of long on the top. I felt like a Jim Carrey character, or like a Three Stooges character. It was really embarrassing. I remember going into the visiting room, having been built up so much to see this woman, and her just look at me with this like look of horror. It was one of the times that I realized, like, you know what? It's good to have a good barber, but every now and then it's just good to go back to the basics and just cut it all off. Appreciate the barbers I knew over that time, and if I ever decide to grow my hair out or shape my beard, I'll go to a barber out here and see the difference between in there and out in the world.